Welcome to Excel and Business Math video number 8. In this video, we got to talk about arithmetic. Yes, add, subtract, multiply, divide, exponents, and even some new examples for rounding. Now, here's our list of basic arithmetic topics. And yes, just for a moment, we'll talk about some of the terms that we use for things like multiplying and dividing and exponents. But all of the examples we see will be in Excel. Now, before we go over to Excel and look at some great examples, let's go to our class website. Yes, math, just do it in Excel. Hey, week 1, we went to Introduction to Excel. Now we're going to go to this section of our website, so I'm going to click on the Math, Basics, and Word Problems. Here's our video. There's no video because I'm filming it right now. But there's the Excel workbook. You got to download that, open it, and follow along with the video. And there's the PDF note to download. All right, I've already downloaded and opened my file. I'm going to go to the sheet WID words. Whole numbers is the W, integer is the I, and decimal is the D. Whole numbers, we have to define them, also known as counting numbers. A number with no decimals, such as 5,678. And it's not negative. Integer just means we can have positive and negative counting numbers, and 0. Is a number written with a decimal such as 4.987 or 0.062 or minus 1.50. Now, before we go on and do some math examples, we have to talk about the words associated with each position in our number. The decimal point, everything to the left, those are the whole or counting numbers. Everything to the right of the decimal point, those are our decimals. Now, each position has a particular word associated with it. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Notice the THs. On this side, we have ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. Now, it becomes important that we know these words to describe each position, especially when we're writing checks. Now, we're going to go look at an example in just a second here for a check. The only other situation is sometimes you will have a description of where you're supposed to round to. And so these words may come into play in those situations. Now let's go over to the sheet Write It. Now here's our number, and we want to write it. Now if we're looking at this number, this is 150,215 and 29 cents. So I'm going to start by writing 150,000 space. Now, I'm going to use a comma and a space. Not all the time on checks do people write commas, but I'm going to write a comma. 150,000, 200. That describes that digit right there. Then we need to write 15. 150,000, 215, and this is where we write the and 29 cents. Hopefully I spelled it right. I'm going to have to backspace. And when I hit enter, we have written out this word with English words. Now let's go look at our next example on the sheet check. This is a check I made in Excel, and on one of your homework problems, and maybe even on a test, I'll have you complete a check like this. So we have to look at the amount and write it in the amount. So I'm going to write 1,000. That's describing that position right there. I typed a comma. 500. That's describing that digit right there. Space. 28. That 28 is describing those two digits. There's the decimal, so we write and. I'm going to use the ampersand shift 7. That's a symbol that means and. And then I need to write that 72 cents. 72 cents and enter. Now, I have to tell you a funny story because I once wrote a check. I ran a business. I had to write lots of checks. I wrote a check. It was supposed to be 8,000 something, something, something. And I wrote the 8,000 something something here, but for some reason when I got to the amount, I wrote 7,000 something something. And when the bank goes to verify this and pay out the amount to the person you wrote the check to, if there's a difference between the two, it's not the number, it's the written words that prevail. So what happened? Later, I got a $1,000 bill from the company I'd written the check to, and I couldn't believe it. And sure enough, I went back and looked at my check, and I had written the incorrect words here. So you got to be careful when it gets to checks and writing out the words. All right, now we want to go over to moo. I thought we already did math, order of operations. Yes, we did. Here's our operators. In this video, we'll actually go through and look at a few examples of each one of these operations. There's the operators. There's the keyboards. Here's our math order of operation, which we've already done a bunch. If you forget, just use this little list off to the side like we did earlier in the class. Now, here's the only example we're going to do here, although we will see a finance example when we talk about exponents later in this video. Hey, gross pay is hours worked times wage per hour. So this person worked from 8 a.m. all the way to 15. That's military time. So we need to subtract 15 hours through the day, subtract 8 from it. That'll give us the number of hours worked. Then we need to multiply it by the wage per hours. So no problem. I'm going to take 15 minus that 8. Just for a moment, I'm going to Control-Enter. OK, 7 hours. No problem. I'm going to hit F2 and multiply it, and watch what happens. Uh-oh. Remember, we talked about this 2 videos ago. If you use your arrow keys to get a cell reference, and the arrow key moves through the formula instead of going to get to the cell reference, that means you're in the wrong mode down here. We can clearly see it's edit mode. When you hit F2 to put a formula in edit mode, that's edit mode, which means your arrow keys move through the formula. So with my cursor at the end, if I hit the F2 key again, I can see down here it says Enter. That means my arrow keys will work to get a cell reference. Now, of course, when I hit Enter, minus $207, man, the employee's mad. They thought they'd make a positive number here. F2, we, of course, forgot our order of operations. We have to force subtraction before we do our multiplying. So there we go. We'll subtract 15 minus 8 before we multiply. So when I hit Enter, there's the amount of gross pay. Now, we want to go over to the sheet Add. We got to talk about some important tips for adding. If numbers are next to each other, use the sum function with a range of cells rather than using the plus symbol. So what we don't want to do is this. I'm going to arrow up, plus symbol on the number pad, arrow up, plus, arrow up. And there's our formula. Although it'll give us the right answer, it is not efficient. As we talked about earlier in this class, it takes too long, it's not fast enough, and it can't handle structural changes like inserting a row. That formula will not update. But our sum function with the keyboard Alt equals will update. When I hit Enter, both formulas give us the right answer. But if I were to right-click Insert up here and type a number like 5, watch what happens down here. When I hit Enter, that totally updates. But of course, this one has no chance. Now, here's a funny story. My first day working in an accounting job at Broderick Consulting in Berkeley, California. I think it was the year 2000 or 2001. Mary Broderick handed me the spreadsheet that the previous accountant had created. And all the totals were created like this rather than using the sum function. So, of course, I had to ask her. I said, hey, Mrs. Broderick, may I edit these formulas and make them a little bit more efficient? And she said, yes, of course, by all means. But, oh, I couldn't believe it when I put it in edit mode, and there was plus, plus, plus. And it was a huge column. It was like for 25 different rent expenses or something ridiculous like that. I'm going to hit Enter. Now, I'm going to leave that inserted row just like that. Example number 2, if numbers are not next to each other, we can use the sum function or the plus symbol. So our example is we have an invoice here with some products and amounts, and we have 1, 2, 3 different invoices. We need to add at the bottom of each one of these. So of course, let's use the sum function. Alt equals is the keyboard. Now notice, I'm actually going to enter this and copy the formula because those are relative cell references. That's a range that's always going to look 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 above. So Control Enter, and I'm going to Control C to copy. Click Control V. Click Control V. F2 if you want to verify that it's still looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cells above. Now, here's our situation. By the way, you can turn off the dancing ants with the Escape key. Here's our situation. We need to add these 3 invoice totals. Well, this is a situation. The numbers are not directly next to each other. So it's OK to use either plus, 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 or the sum function separating the ranges by commas. So let's try the sum function first. Alt equals. Oh, look at that. It got the 1 cell. I'm very carefully going to take my I-beam cursor, click. Notice the screen tip. Number 1, 2, 3. You can have many cells or ranges to add. Let's type a comma to get to the next argument, number 2. So I click on that cell. Now, as we saw earlier in the class, you can either type a comma when you are entering ranges or cells into an aggregate function like this, or you can simply hold the Control key. Watch. There's no comma and no cell reference. When I hold Control and click on that third sum total, it put the comma and the cell reference in. Now, when I hit Enter, it's perfectly all right to have that sum, cell, cell, cell. We could just as efficiently do equal sign and then click on the first cell that we want to add. I'm going to use the plus symbol on the number pad. Click, plus, click. And there we go. When I hit Enter, either one of those formulas would be OK because the numbers we're adding are not directly next to each other. Now let's scroll down and look at our next example. All right, adding in example 3. The commutative property of addition allows us to add in any order. So actually, from this above example, see we have 1, 2, 3 numbers. It's perfectly all right to add them in that order there because adding them in that order is exactly equal to adding the 3 numbers in a slightly different order. We get exactly the same number. Now, commutative property comes from the word commute, to move around. So it's perfectly all right, actually, with addition and multiplication, which we'll have an example of later. With either one of those operators, you can either add or multiply in any order, and you'll get the same answer. So if I go ahead and create that formula right there, Enter, it's the same as doing it in, let's just do it the reverse order there, Enter. All right, example number 4. If the ranges of cells are not next to each other, use the sum with ranges separated by commas. So Alt equals, I do not want that empty cell there. I'm going to highlight just the numbers I want. You either type a comma or I'm going to hold Control, click. I'm still holding Control. I'm just clicking, clicking, clicking. And there it is. We're perfectly all right to add from 3 different ranges and Enter. Notice this is the same example we had earlier, but we didn't have the totals at the bottom. Now, example 5, we've done this many times, but I'm not going to let you get through this class without knowing exactly when to round and when to use the round function. Now, our goal is to add at the bottom. Over here, it looks like F2. We did our multiplication. Gross pay times some tax rate. That is, when I hit Enter, that's the amount for J. Dillon. But notice it's not properly rounded. So when we add at the bottom, we get 741.6. Now here's the deal. This is money. This is an actual dollar and cents amount that is going to be subtracted out of this person's paycheck. if our goal is to add at the bottom, you have to remember to round before you add. So equals, and we use the round function. Right in the number argument, we can create our formula. Left arrow times up arrow, F4 to lock it. So as I copy down, that cell reference doesn't move. Comma. Number of digits, we're counting on our fingers from the decimal. 1, 2. That's the penny position. So I simply type a 2. Control Enter. I copy it down. Notice I have properly rounded all the numbers. Now I can simply add Alt equals and Enter. Notice we get a penny difference. By the way, sometimes if you accidentally forget to use the round, you might get the exact right answer. But next time you put some new numbers here, of course, you run the risk of an incorrect answer. Now, another hint about tests in this class and you creating solutions out there in the business world. We were required to round each individual amount. So we had to round here. But don't just round everything. Don't come down to the bottom, Alt equals. I'm going to redirect it. Because sometimes I see this. People get nervous, and they just round everything. It is not necessary to round like this. And the reason why? Because all the numbers are already rounded. There will never be a problem if all of these are properly rounded to the penny. Enter. So if you were to hand in a formula like this on a test, you will get marked off a little bit because it is just not necessary. It overcomplicates the formula, and it makes Excel do an extra layer of calculating that is not necessary. All right, now we got to go over to the sheet sub. I'm actually going to use my sheet scroll arrows over here, and there's the sheet sub. And on the sheet sub, we got to talk about subtracting. Now, there's not that much to subtracting, and we've already seen some great business examples. Total revenue, that's like all of the money coming into the business. Total expenses, that's like all the money going out of the business. And the difference is called net income. That's our profit or earnings. So, of course, we type an equal sign, up arrow to get total revenue. And we use the minus sign to subtract, up arrow, the total expenses, and Enter. Here's another example, example number 2. When we're subtracting 3 or more numbers, it's usually easier to add all the numbers that should be subtracting using sum, and then subtract that single sum. Now, here's a common payroll example. We have a bunch of names. Here's their gross pay. And later when we study payroll, we'll have a bunch of deductions, and we'll actually calculate these based on certain percentages. But look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each one of those 4 expenses has to be subtracted from gross profit. So rather than doing it individually, Alt equals, and notice when you do Alt equals, Excel is trying to be polite. The sum function is programmed to look for all the numbers that are near it. But that one should not be included. No problem. The dancing ants are still moving, so we simply click and drag and redirect. Those are the 4 expenses as relative cell references. Control Enter, double click and send it down. Go to the last cell, hit F2. All right, now we can calculate net pay. Equals, and I'm going to click on the gross pay, minus FICA, minus Medicare, minus FedTech, minus pensions. That is not the way you should do it. Control Enter, double click and send it down. Go to the last cell, F2. Yes, it will work, but it takes longer than adding them up first. And guess what? If this is a payroll table, what if you inserted a column and added a new deduction, which is not uncommon? Then this formula would not work, just like we saw with our plus, plus, plus example earlier in this video. Enter. The real way to do it is equal sign. I'm going to get my gross pay minus the cell with the sum of all of the expenses. By minusing the sum of 4 expenses, it's just like subtracting the 4 numbers individually. Control Enter, double click and send it down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. Enter. Now we want to go over to the sheet add and sub and talk about an important relationship between adding and subtracting. You can always check your work when adding and subtracting. And here's what that means. Total revenue, total expenses, equal sign, and I'm going to take total revenue minus total expenses. Here's two numbers. We subtracted them. When I hit enter, we get an answer. Well, here's the total amount. Here's the two parts. If we down here check and add these two parts, we better get exactly that same number. Now I'm going to Control-C, Control-V. Highlight both these cells, Control-C, Control-V. Copy this, Control-C, Control-V. And this one I'm going to have to type because that's a formula. 640237 and enter. Equal sign, and I'm going to add using the plus symbol, up arrow, and I better get exactly the same total revenue as I originally started with. Now I'm going to hit the escape key to turn off those dancing ants. Similarly, we could rearrange these in whichever order we wanted. If we took total revenue and subtracted net income, we better get total expenses. So I'm going to say total revenue minus net income, enter, and I better get total expenses just like the original. Sometimes it's helpful to check your work that way. And when we get to multiplying and dividing, we'll see a similar trick for checking our work. All right, let's go over to this sheet, multiply. All right, now multiplying in Excel example 1. Well, we already know this. If we're multiplying two numbers, we use the multiplication symbol, asterisk. Now, here's our first example, product, quantity, price. We want a formula that we can enter and copy down. Now, if I say 85 times 21.25, the terms in math are, hey, that's a factor, and that's a factor, and the result is called a product. Now, when we do 85 times 21.25, we're really asking the question, if I resize this a bit, give me 85 of these 21.25. So I'm saying, hey, I want 85 of these numbers right here, 21.25. Factor, factor, and here's our product. Equal sign, left arrow, times left arrow. Now, we don't need to worry about rounding here. We're not adding at the bottom. So Control-Enter, double-click, and send it down. So in this example, we had two numbers that we were multiplying. But there's another option for multiplying in Excel. So example number 2. Sometimes we want to multiply in succession a set of numbers, 3 or more. If that's the case, we can use something called the product function. Now, we'll see this example later when we do invoicing, where we need to take a trade discount, calculate the complement, but then we need to multiply them, 1, 2, 3. Now, no problem. You could do the multiplication symbol, but we have the option equals PRO. That's a probability function. I type a D, I see product. That multiplies all the numbers given in its argument, so tab. You could see like the sum function and other aggregate functions. It has a number of different arguments. I'm simply going to highlight the 3 cells with the complements, close parentheses. And all it will do is multiply 0.5 times 0.9 times 0.94 and give you the product. Now, if you did it longhand, you'd get exactly the same answer. Enter. Now, we're not going to have too many examples in this class where we have lots of numbers that we're multiplying in succession. The same thing applies, though, if we had the possibility of inserting a row here. Remember, a formula like this would not accommodate a new cell, whereas with a range, cell reference, colon, cell reference, if we inserted a row, product would update, times, times, times would not update. Now, again, we don't have too many situations. I think one of the only times is in our invoice chapter when we're multiplying lots of numbers in succession. Now, example number 3, we've got to talk about the commutative property of multiplication. We saw with addition, if we had 2 plus 5, That would be the same as 5 plus 2. Well, in multiplication, remember, commutative comes from the word commute, which means to move around. So 2 times 5 is the same as 5 times 2. Equal sign, left arrow, times left arrow. Hey, that's 2 times 5. And really, we're asking, hey, give me 2 5s. Enter. Equal sign, left arrow, times left arrow. When I hit enter, whoa, I got the same exact answer. Here we're asking, give me 5 2s. Now we want to go look at our next example, example 4. And guess what? It has to do with rounding. Now let's look at our 3-step rounding rule and then talk about it in regards to multiplying. Our rules are, we are required to round, like with money, if that comes out true, and you have extraneous decimals, if that comes out true, and we use result in subsequent formula. If all of those come out true, we must use round. But the question is, before we perform multiplication, can you predict if we need to use round? Which for us, when we're multiplying, we want to ask the question, do we get extraneous decimals? So we're going to go down and look at example 5 and 6 and see if we can predict. Because in both situations, we're dealing with money. We're going to make multiple calculations and add for both of these situations. But let's look at 1, 2 situations and see if we can predict. This calculation is a quantity. That means counting how many of the products we have. These are counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're multiplying times a price. There are never going to be any decimals past the penny position. That means we only have dollars and pennies. How about down here? We have a price, but we have a discount. Can we predict if we're going to get extraneous decimals in either situation? Well, here, a counting number times dollars and pennies, you are never going to get extraneous decimals. Down here, we are multiplying 2 decimals. So we definitely run the risk of getting extraneous decimals. So for example 5, you're in charge of creating this invoice. You know the pricing. Your pricing never has anything but dollars and pennies. This isn't like gas where we have partial pennies, or sometimes in the part industry, screws, nuts, nails can have prices that are partial pennies. But we don't have that here. So we can simply build our formula, equal sign, arrow to get quantity times arrow to get price. Control Enter, copy it down. We have no chance of getting extraneous decimals here. So we don't have to use round. I'm going to click on the last cell, F2. Down here, however, we definitely run the risk. Decimal times decimal, we run that risk. So we're going to use the round function. Right in the number argument, arrow to get my price times arrow to get my discount, comma, 2, because we're rounding to the penny, close parentheses, Control Enter. And when I copy it down, all of these numbers are properly rounded. The total here is correct. If I scroll down here, this is what happens if you don't use round on this same example. Down here, if we were rounding this manually, there's the position. To the right, that's 5 or more. So we add 1, and we would get 66 pennies when the correct total is 67. Now, let's do this number 5 example again down here. I have it repeated as example number 7. Here it is, quantity times price. Remember what we said. You're in charge of this. You know the pricing structure for your invoice. But if you're building a template and you're not sure, this is a formula input. Someone could put a partial penny there. So really, our rule should be like this. We are required to round. You have extraneous decimals. We use result in subsequent formula. But for this second point, or with money, when you're multiplying or dividing and you might have extraneous decimals. Now, here we know we're not going to have them, but we're going to use the round function just to make sure. Because we are dealing with money, that's a formula input. Comma, 2, close parentheses. Control Enter. and copy it down. Now, the rule still stands as number 2 when you have extraneous decimals. But if you're not sure, definitely use that round function. That does not mean, as we saw just a little bit earlier in this video, to start throwing the round function around everywhere, like on the sum. That would be totally unnecessary. All right, so those are some examples for multiplying. Let's use our scroll arrow for our sheets. And I want to click on the divide sheet. All right, so for division, we have to start off by talking about terminology. We can say 10 divided by 2. Earlier in our academic careers, we might have seen it this way, 10 divided by 2. Terminology, the top part is the numerator, sometimes called the dividend. I'm not going to call it dividend. I'm going to call it numerator. The bottom part is called the denominator, sometimes called the divisor. I'm going to call it denominator. The result of division is called a quotient. Now, if we have 10 divided by 2, we are asking, how many 2's are there in 10? So here's the 2. How many of these are in that 10? Well, there's 5 of them. Now, example 1, our symbol that we've been using throughout this class so far, / means division. So if we have an expense for the week and we need daily expense, we can simply divide it by 7. Equal sign, up arrow to get the weekly expense, divided by, and I'm going to type the 7 in because that is not going to change. Notice we didn't bother with numerator and denominator. We just did our division. Sometimes we will have to deal with numerator and denominator. Sometimes, as we'll see in just a moment, some of the Excel functions refer to them as numerator and denominator. And when we get to talking about fractions, we will refer to the top part of division and the bottom part of division as numerator and denominator. So our quotient, equal sign, I'm going to go get the numerator divided by the denominator. How many 2's are in 10? There are 5. Now, we do have a problem when we get to 0 in the denominator. If we do our formula for quotient, equal sign, get the numerator divided by the denominator, which happens to be 0, there's a problem because the question is, how many zeros are in 10? I have no idea how to answer that. Well, luckily in Excel, when we do this, it will tell us, hey, guess what? You divided by 0, and that's not allowed. Now, there is another problem. Notice I typed a 0 in, but if I delete that, when we create a formula, F2, when a cell reference points to an empty cell, internally, it thinks that it's 0. But when I hit Enter, Excel will be polite and remind us that that's not allowed. Now, if we're going to take numerator, denominator, and divide them to get the quotient, well, of course, we can do that. Equal sign, left arrow, / left arrow. There's our formula. When I hit Tab, that's the answer, 4.5. But if we remember doing division the longhand way, how many 2's are in 9? Well, I'm counting on the fingers, and there's not an exact amount. But I know that there's 4 of them. 4 times 2 is 8. I subtract. I get a remainder of 1. Now, in rare cases, we might actually want an answer in Excel that excludes any remainder and doesn't show us any decimal. Similarly, we might want to see what the remainder is. So there are 2 functions, quotient and mod. Now, the quotient function will give us the integer part. Mod function will give us the remainder part. Equals QUO, and I see quotient. And notice the screen tip is polite. It'll tell us what it does. Returns the integer part of division, so tab. And look at this. This function refers to top and bottom as numerator and denominator. So I'm going to use my left arrow to get the numerator, comma, left arrow to get the denominator. That means when I tab, it gives me 4, just the integer part. We can get just the remainder part. And notice the screen tip here returns the remainder after a number is divided by a divisor. Now when I hit Tab, we notice, look, it used the same words as in the screen tip, but those are different argument names than our quotient function. So number means numerator, divisor means denominator. So I'm going to arrow over to get the numerator, comma, arrow over to get denominator. Now the mod, when I hit Enter, will give me just the remainder part. Now in this class, I don't think we have any examples where we need to use the mod function for remainder. There may be one or two that we use quotient, but the rest of the time when we're doing division, we're using straight /. Now let's scroll down, and example 5 and 6. Same rounding rules for multiplying apply for division. We'll see one example where we don't have to use round and one example where we do. Now this example here, we have students and their total points for the class. Well, the maximum possible, 500 points for this class. That means this is the whole or the total. Each one of these is a part of the whole. Imani did not get all the possible points, just part of the points. But notice 360, whoa, 500, all the points. Remember, if we take in this cell right here, 500 divided by 500, anytime you have a number divided by itself, it's always 1. Why? Because the question is, how many 500s are in 500? Well, exactly 1. So Tyrone gets a perfect score. But for each one of the other students, we have a part, and we want to compare it to the whole. So the question is, how many 500s are in 477? Well, we know it's not 1. It's got to be less than 1. So let's calculate our decimal grade for each student using division. Anytime we have a part and we want to compare it to the whole, we can use division. Equal sign, left arrow to get the score for that particular student as a relative cell reference, divided by, and I'm going to arrow over. We need to lock it on E4, so I use the F4 key. Now I Control Enter and double click and send it down. Now for each one of the students, we have calculated part divided by whole. That is a decimal or proportion of the total possible points. Later, a couple of videos ahead, we'll see how to convert that to a percentage. This would end up being 79.2% of the total points. Really what it means is when you see that, it means for every 1 point, you got 0.792 points. Tyrone, on the other hand, for every 1 point possible in the class, Tyrone always got exactly 1 point. Now, this example, we were not required to round, so we just did our division and copied it down. Example 6, we have annual expenses for these different policies. We need to calculate monthly expense, which means dividing by 12. But do we have to round? Well, our 3 rules are: we're required to round. Like with money, that's true. We run the risk of extraneous decimals. Yes, we do, because we have some decimals here, and we're going to divide those decimals. And we can default to our rule for money. If you're not sure, go ahead on the individual calculations. For money, use the round because we're going to be using them in a subsequent calculation. So all 3 conditions are met. Right here, I'm going to say equals round. In the number argument, we're totally allowed to create a formula. Left arrow, annual expense divided by 12. Now, comma, 2 to the penny, close parentheses. Control Enter and copy it down. We have our absolutely rounded to the penny individual amounts, so our sum function adds correctly. Now, actually, in both of these examples, I forgot to check my formula. F2. That one's looking good, particularly here because I had to lock it, so I better come down to the last cell and F2. All right, so on this sheet, we saw some important dividing examples. Now let's go over to the sheet multiply and divide. and talk about how we can check your work when multiplying and dividing. So if you're multiplying, you can check with division. If you're dividing, you can check with multiplying. Now here's an example. We have the product, quantity, and price. If I multiply these, equals 85 times, and notice this is 21.255. It looks like the price has a partial penny. But no problem. We're multiplying. This will give us a total. If I take that total and divide it by whichever one of these, I better get the other one. Enter. So that's the total. By the way, when you're checking with multiplying and dividing, you have to use the non-rounded original numbers. So I'm going to, looking with my eyeballs, type that one down here, 1806.675, and enter. The price was 21.255, and enter. Total divided by this, better get 85. So you ready? Equals, arrow, arrow. That's the total divided by the price. And when I hit enter, 85. And similarly down here, I could divide the total by 85. And when I do that, of course, I get exactly the original price. So you can check your answer. And actually, as we go through the class, doing lots of multiplying and dividing, we will check our answer. All right, now let's go over to this sheet, exponents. And here's our first example. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 2s all in a row. Now, if you had a column of them, this is easy enough to simply use the product function. Product function will multiply all those. Highlight the range. It takes 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, and so on. But if you ever have to write that out, here's an example with 4 2s. I don't want to have to write all of this out. So that's where exponents come in. If you have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, you take the actual number that's repeated, and that's called the base. Then you count how many times you want to repeat those numbers. That's the exponent. And the operator in between each number is multiplication. So really, exponents is a quick and easy way to write a number that's repeatedly multiplied by each other. So for this example right here, 2, that's called the base. How many of them? That's called the exponent. 2 to the 6. If we were writing it on paper, that's how we would write it. But in a formula in Excel, equal sign, we take the base, and then we use caret. Shift 6. That means exponent. So whatever comes next, 2 raised to the 6th power. And that simple formula will take that 2 and multiply it 6 times. So when I hit enter, that's the answer, 64. Either way, we're going to get exactly the same answer. Now, just as a side note, if you ever actually wanted to write this, either in Excel, Word, or PowerPoint, because you're doing lots of math, here's how you would do it. You type a 2 and a 6, and you have to highlight just the 6 part. And then use Control-1, and there it is, superscript. Over in Word and PowerPoint, this is up in the ribbon tabs for formatting. It's called superscript. But actually, watch this. This is not going to work because I'm going to click OK. It looks like it's working. What? It didn't work. That's because it's a number. We can't apply individual font to numbers. So here's how you really do it. You have to convert this to text. And the way you do it is you type a lead apostrophe. As soon as you put a lead apostrophe in the cell, anything that comes after is automatically text. Oh, and there's our default alignment that we talked about at the very beginning of this class. So important because it immediately tells us Excel thinks that this is text. Now we're allowed to highlight that 6, just the 6 part, Control-1. Notice Control-1 when you're highlighting an individual character is not really all of those tabs we saw. The only thing we can do is add some specialized font, and we're going to do that. Superscript, click OK, and when I hit Enter, that's how you get an exponent over here in Excel. Now, over in Word or PowerPoint, you don't have to put the lead apostrophe. There's the instructions for writing an exponent over here in Excel. Now, example number 2. Now, this is a finance example, and later in the class, we'll have 2 whole weeks for finance. But here it is. There's a famous financial formula for future value of a lump sum invested with an annual rate. So here's the amount we want to put in the bank. We want to leave it in there for 10 years. And this is the promised interest rate. Now, this is a contract like a CD, so that's the interest rate they'll pay out for each year. And here's our formula to calculate what's called the future value. We have to take 1, add the interest rate, and there's our exponent. We have to raise it to the number of years and then multiply it by the amount invested. Now, this means we get to practice order of operations and our exponents. Equal sign in parentheses 1 plus our annual interest rate, close parentheses. We want to force that addition before shift 6. That's the exponent. We have to raise that amount to our number of years and then multiply it by the amount deposited in the bank. Now, we'll talk in more detail about what that formula means. But for us right now, we're seeing a relevant example of when we have to use an exponent in a math class like this. When we hit Enter, that's the amount. So in 10 years, we put in 2,500. We take out 3,882 and 42 pennies. Now, those were 2 examples for exponents. And we have one more topic. So I'm going to use my scroll arrow and scroll over to the sheet Round Hint. Now, these are all of the positions and the names for any number we might encounter. Right here in yellow, these are the numbers we enter into the second argument of round. So for our penny or hundredths position, we put a 2. If we had to round to the thousandths, we'd put a 3. Now, remember what we said. You can always start at the decimal and count 1, 2, 3, 4. Going back the other way, 2, 1. That would make rounding to the dollar 0, -1, -2, -3, rounding to the thousandths position, -3. So we want to see examples of -3, 0, and a 3. Let's go over to the sheet Round Example. Now, on Round Example, we've already seen lots of examples when we have to use round to. We multiply amount times discount. So, of course, this is money. We're dealing with pennies. So F2, we use a 2 in the second argument of round to round to the penny. Now, here's our example down here. This is a federal income tax form example. We have the name, taxable amount for each person, and the individual tax rate. Well, the tax form says you have to round to the dollar. So we're multiplying. We're definitely going to use it in a subsequent formula. So I'm going to use the round function, round. The number, we can put a formula, taxable amount times tax rate, comma. Now, for number of digits, here it is. Decimal 1, 2, go in the other direction. 2, 1, 0. So I'm typing a 0 there. That's what we use when we're rounding to the dollar. Close parentheses, and copy it down. Each individual amount is rounded properly to the dollar amount, and the total at the bottom is correct. Now let's look at another example. This follows up on our grading example. We want to see how to round to the thousandths position because the syllabus states that it's required. That's right. In some contracts for grading, it'll tell you exactly which position they're going to round your decimal grade to before calculating your final grade. Now, we have individual scores, and we need to compare each one to the total. So we're definitely going to use division. But the syllabus says over here, decimal 1, 2, 3, we're required to round to the thousandths position. So I'm going to use my round equals round. Left arrow to get class score, divided by up arrow to get the total. F4 to lock it because we're copying down. Comma. Number of digits, I'm putting a 3. Close parentheses. Control Enter, and copy it down. Each student's decimal grade is properly rounded to the correct thousandths position. F2 in the last cell. Cell references looking good. Now, if we wanted to use these in a subsequent calculation, like calculating the average, we could absolutely do that. Average, I see it highlighted in blue, tab. This is an aggregate function. We just put the numbers so we don't have to add them up and divide by the count. Close parentheses. The inputs into this calculation have been properly rounded using a 3 in the second argument of round. So when I hit Enter, whoa, wait a second. The answer isn't properly rounded. Now, two things. One is we're actually not using this in a subsequent calculation. So we can simply right-click and on the mini toolbar, use our decreased decimals. If we're just looking at it, that's sufficient. If we actually wanted to officially round, can we round the average function? Sure, absolutely. F2, right after the equal sign, type round, tab. Anything that goes into number, whether it's a calculation like division or multiplying, or some function like this, round function's job is to take that and round it to whatever position. So I'm coming to the end, comma, 3, close parentheses. By the way, when you put two functions together like this, this is called nesting the functions. When I hit Enter, I'm going to actually click back in that cell to prove. Go up to Home, Number. I have the number because I decreased decimals. I'm going to make sure and apply General. I want to prove to myself that sure enough, the round function took the output from the average function and rounded to the third digit to the right, thousandths position. Now, our last example for rounding, we want to round to the thousands position. Sometimes you need to do this when we're creating financial reports. So here we have the cash balance for Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Facebook. And oftentimes on financial statements, you have to take the full number and round it either to the thousands or the millions. So we're going to click in the cell equals, and we're going to use the round function. Now, everything we've done so far in the class when we get to the number argument is we put multiplying, dividing, or an aggregate calculation like average. But we're absolutely allowed to just click on that number. We got these numbers, and now we need to round them. Comma. Number of digits. Well, if the ones position is 0, 0, -1, -2, -3 would give us the thousands position. So -3, close parentheses. Control Enter. No problem. Look at that. It totally did it. Copy it down. Now, notice what it did. It picked the position. There it was, the 4. It looked to the right. That's 5 or more, so it added 1 to get 25. Now, if we round like this, and we're going to put this on a financial statement, we wouldn't want the zeros here. We would just write 48088 and then we would indicate that it's rounded by putting in thousands. Now, anytime you want to get rid of zeros at the end of the number, you can just count how many zeros there are, 1, 2, 3, and add a 1. That's why we're going to divide by 1,000. Click in the top cell, F2, divide by 1,000. I'm typing that number in because it's never going to change. Control Enter, and double click and send it down. And just like that, we have rounded to the thousands position and then divided by 1,000 to get rid of those extra zeros. Now we can record these numbers on our report. All right, so that's our last example for rounding. Over here, there are a bunch of homework problems. I think there's 7 homework problems for this video. Now, in this video, we talked about rounding. We saw 3 different new examples besides rounding to the penny. Over on exponents, we talked about exponents. Back over on multiplying and dividing, we saw how we can check multiplying and dividing by using dividing or multiplying. We talked all about dividing, multiplying on the multiply sheet. We saw how we could check adding and subtracting with subtracting and adding. Talked about subtracting, adding. And we reminded ourselves of MOO, the math order of operations. We saw how to write a check, and we started it all off with seeing the individual names for each digit in a number we might have. Now, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and sub, because there's always lots more videos to come from excelisfun, including next video number 9. We're going to see an amazing trick to help us solve any math problem, also known as how to set up a word problem. All right, we'll see you next video.